can't believe I'm saying this, but the Philadelphia 76ers were my favorites to win the NBA championship this season. But about 30 games into the season, I realized they were completely cooked. They went from championship contenders to everyone thinking that they now need to tank. And here's why. This year the team has been terrible. They have a record of 22-44. And even though they have a great coach, it does not even matter because he can't even fix how bad the problems have been. But how problematic has the team actually been? Well, let me tell you now, it only starts with two people. Let's start with Paul George. The Sixers traded away Tobias Harris and they acquired Paul George in the offseason. This meant they had one of the best teams on paper with Maxey and Embiid by his side. However, very early on in the preseason, we saw that Paul George had one of the most sus injuries in history. Now, many of us know that PG is already an injury-prone player, and that didn't surprise us in the preseason when he had a hyperextension in his leg somehow. This meant that he missed half of the first 20 games of the season, and he was meant to be the player that was going to tip them over the edge. So considering he wasn't there for the first beginning part of their season, the Sixers struggled, and it was very evident that when he was on the court, he didn't even produce. This season, across the 41 games that he has played, he has been ineffective. This season for the Sixers, he's averaged 16 points, 5 rebounds, and 4.3 assists, while shooting 29% from 3 and 38% from the field, which is crazy when you consider the averages of him last year. Just looking for the Clippers, where he had about 22 points, had about 5 rebounds, and he had about 4 assists a game, all while shooting 41% from the three-point line and 47% from the field. In all honesty, Paul George has been nothing but a shell of himself, and I want to blame it on his health, but really, it's just been poor out there. When you actually watch him play the game, he looks like he's scared to go to the rack, and he's always taking tough shots from the three-point line. Well, how does this look for the Sixers fans? Daryl Morey decided that he wanted to get rid of Tobias Harris and bring in Paul George. They paid Paul George more money in order for him to produce more than Tobias Harris. But even when you look at both of those players right now, they're producing the same amount statistically. But also, when you look at what Tobias Harris was producing last year, it's, if not better, or the same as Paul George is producing this year, which means you just paid more money to get the same production out of a player that was exactly more or less the same. Paul George might just be the most expensive role player in the league this season. And what's even crazier is, there was a rookie, Jared McCain, that they signed this year, who has been amazing. He had an 8-game stretch where he was averaging 25 points, shooting 45% from the three-point line. He looked like a better version of Paul George out there. And it was embarrassing to think, as fans, when Jared McCain went out because he had a torn meniscus injury, which meant he was going to be out for the rest of the season, we thought, oh no, it's over for the Sixers, forgetting that Paul George was still playing at the time and was healthy and ready. Paul George's lack of effectiveness and productivity on the court has affected not only the team, but also Maxey. Maxey was under a lot more stress this season as a point guard, considering that he had to be that number one option. He had to pick up a load as a player that's only in his 5th year. All Maxey could really do was his best. But at the end of the day, even though statistically he's still scoring and he looked strong, his field goal percentage was down and so was his three-point percentage. And that's down to teams choosing to build their game plans against him, forgetting that Paul George was even on the court. But that's enough about Maxey. My point being, Paul George was a problem this season, and he actually held the Sixers back from achieving what they needed to do. He was brought in to supplement the fact that Embiid was not going to be on the court throughout the entire season. But all he did was never show up, especially when they needed him to. And he's still struggling to show up as we speak. But that brings me on to the next man, Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid, at the beginning of the season, had already given up on the Sixers regular season. He said, I'm not going to play back-to-backs, but I believe he said that in confidence that the Sixers were going to make it to the playoffs anyway. But as I mentioned, 20 games in, they had only won 5 games, and that meant it was going to be a struggle to fight their way to the playoffs. With a struggling record at the beginning of the season, an injured Embiid found himself trying to play. Now, he only played 19 of the 66 games this season, and it's been evident that he's been on one leg. He struggled to get in the post and play like his dominant self. We see him settling for mid-range jumpers, trying to draw fouls, and it just doesn't look good at all. He doesn't look like the unstoppable scorer that we once have seen. In the games he's played so far, he's had career lows in field goal percentage and three-point percentage, whilst also producing significantly less than his previous seasons where we saw him average 30 points a game. Healthy or unhealthy, Embiid has just been in poor form this season, and it's best that he sits out for the rest of it. Now, many people are very quick to rush and blame Embiid for this situation. At the end of the day, you are the star of the team, and it's on your back to be available for your team to play. Because without you, your team are going to struggle because you're the main guy. However, he has been nursing an injury since the end of last season. But he didn't need to go into play in the Olympics. He chose to play in the Olympics. And without adequate rest, he came into this season unhealthy again. Now, this wouldn't be the first time, and why I understand why everyone would be angry with him. However, it seems like this injury has been one that's been nagging him forever. Now, he has had a face injury this season, he had an ankle injury, but really it's been the swelling of the knee that they can't reduce. It was announced that he's going to be out for the rest of the season, that he needs to get a hip realignment surgery, which means that he's actually going to be missing a year, which means we're not going to see Joel Embiid for potentially the 2025-26 season. The fact that he'll be missing a year shows that it's actually a pretty serious situation. But what if I told you by the end of this season, Joel Embiid would have missed 49% of the games he should have played for the Sixers since being drafted? When you pull out stats like that, he's either seriously unlucky when it comes to health or not serious enough when it comes to his rehab. The three-man core have only played 15 games together, and when they did play together, they have a record of 7-8, which means they weren't even good when they were playing together. I blame it all on Paul George. I'm just saying. Now, the Sixers have actually made a decision that maybe they're just going to rest all their players. They're going to rest their core three guys. Paul George. I'm assuming they're resting Paul George because they want to trade Paul George, and I don't blame them. But I'll get to that in a second. I'm assuming they're obviously resting Joel Embiid because I guess he's never been healthy. And Tyrese Maxey, I believe they need to keep that guy for his future. I'm not sure if you got it there, but I believe Paul George is the main reason for their disaster. And the worst part about this whole situation is when he left the Clippers on his podcast, he was talking about how they never paid him the whole time and he was underpaid. However, now he's getting overpaid and he's producing far less than the Clippers would have ever expected him to produce or the Sixers expected him to do. So it's just embarrassing that you're talking about money, but really you don't even deserve the money you're now being paid. However, with all this misfortune, the Sixers do have a potential upside. They could land Cooper Flag. Now, if they manage to land Cooper Flag, that would be crazy, and I guess that would be amazing for their future. But the only way that happens is if they manage to get a lottery pick of some sort. Now, they've actually traded away their 2025 draft pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder, but they've protected their top 6, which means if they get 1 to 6, they may be able to either trade up for Cooper Flag or select Cooper Flag full stop. However, the chances of that are not guaranteed. Washington, Charlotte, Utah, and New Orleans are all teams that are worse than the Sixers. The chances of them getting Cooper Flag are a lot higher. Whether they land Cooper Flag or not, the Sixers have a big decision to make this offseason. Paul George, is he going or is he staying? You need to make a decision. The other decision you've got to make is Embiid. He's definitely going to be out for next season. So how are you going to build a roster that will stay afloat for next season? Or will you just try and tank again? Who knows? But whatever they choose to do, one thing remains a fact. This season has been a disaster. And Daryl Morey, I want to blame you. Just saying. Anyways, thank you very much for getting to the end of this Yap session. I want to hear your thoughts on this whole situation because the Sixers, man, they've been struggling this season. But I want to hear your comments. Whose fault do you really think it is?